and I'm going to make you a co-host, Darby.
Thank you. Where is my tab? Here we go. Have the agenda open and Zoom disappeared. Pardon me. Why does it do that? All right. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the May public board meeting. Thank you all for joining us. Sorry, just technical difficulties with Zoom. When I share a screen, it seems I don't want to see my Zoom screen anymore. So this is the May public board meeting. Before we start, we need to do a call to order. Let's start with the names on my screen. We have here Matt.
Here.
Bill.
Here.
Ricardo.
Here.
Sam.
Here.
Steve.
Here.
Kevin said he is not able to join today, and I am here as well. We also have with us from the foundation, we have Andrew, Jason, Star, Kelly, Lauren, and Dawn, as well as Rob Van der Veer. Thanks very much for joining us, Rob. Bernard, thank you very much for joining us. We'll get to you in just a moment. And Leah, did I miss anybody? Very well. Right before we start, I do need to call everybody's attention to the conflict of interest and antitrust statement. As you know, we are a public charity nonprofit, and we have individuals from many competing organizations. We must abide by all the applicable antitrust and non-competition laws. If there are any issues that arise that might be a conflict of interest or appeared conflict of interest, this must be noted, defined, and as necessary, we need to disclose that and might even need to avoid voting. The first item to talk about are changes to the agenda. As you mentioned, Andrew, we want to start, before everything else, to start with the European tax entity discussion. Just to change the order, I'd like to get an affirmative approval here from names on my screen. Matt?
Yes.
The question here is to change the order of the agenda to start with Bernard. Matt?
Yep, approved.
Bill? Bill, you're mute.
Yes.
Ricardo?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And that's a yes from me. With all that being said, I'd like to turn over the conversation to Andrew and Bernard.
Okay, so thank you, Bernard, for making time with us. I do appreciate the fact that it's out of hours for you, and we'll try to keep this as concise and prompt as possible, but the board does actually have some questions. I think I'd like to kick it off with essentially, I think the first and foremost question on the board's mind is, do we actually need a European entity to run conferences in the European area? I think that's probably the first and foremost thing, because we've had conflicting advice over a period of time, and we've never really made any money from the actual entity, but we probably have saved money through taxes. But I'd like your professional opinion, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. So I was contacted by your organization, by Lauren, regarding initially an event you were organizing, I think, in Portugal, and a future event that needs to be organized in the Netherlands. So to answer quickly and directly to your question is, you don't need a European entity to organize events in Europe. Nevertheless, because you have one, it might be very useful. And I'll try to summarize this in a couple of ideas. So first, you have to understand that when you organize an event within the EU, the European Union, any of the 27 member states, where you will charge an access fee for the participant to attend the conference, or a registration fee, as you might call it. VAT will be due on this registration fee in the member state where the event takes place. In Portugal, you should have charged Portuguese VAT. In the Netherlands, you will have to charge Dutch VAT. You organize it, then in Poland, it's going to be Polish VAT. That means that the organizer of the conference will each time have to register for VAT purpose in the country in question, start charging VAT, collecting that VAT, paying it to the local treasury, but at the same time deducting VAT on its purchase, like the conference hall rental, the catering, the hotel accommodation, according to the local regulations of deduction. And when the event is over and that you've reported everything, you can cancel your VAT number and you're done. That's what any organizer of conference charging a registration fee in Europe will have to do in any country. Meaning if it's the US entity, it will be the US entity that has to go through this process. If it's your Belgian entity, your Belgian entity will have to go to the same process. That being said, the whole process is very different for EU entity than for US entity. By different, I mean that in most European countries, a non-EU entity like your US-based foundation or association will have to name a fiscal representative in any country where it organizes an event. The fiscal representative, it's an important distinction, will be the person liable for your fiscal debt in front of the local authorities. Meaning that they will, the local authorities, will it be in the Netherlands, will it be in Portugal or anywhere else, will not recognize you as an entity. They wouldn't care who you are. They will only deal with your fiscal representative. And that person needing to be established in the country in question will be liable for all your debts. That means that there is a huge risk for the fiscal representative. So that means that in some country, nobody wants to do it.
Mm-hmm.
In some country, the costs are I will say high, but high sometimes is not, it doesn't translate the idea of how insane the cost can be. Like, for example, in some countries, they just charge a percentage of the turnover. On top of that, there might be securities required under the form of cash deposit or bank guarantees. Sometimes the administration, the authorities themselves request a bank guarantee. So you can have one for the authority, one for the fiscal representative. And like in some countries, they don't even start the process of registering your VAT number without receiving the bank guarantee. From experience, establishing a bank guarantee from the US, it has to go through a European bank. It can take from 6 days to 6 months, depending on the good relations you have with your bank and the good relation your bank has with its local branch. So that's for a non-EU entity. EU entity, like your Belgian entity, doesn't need all of that. They also need to get a VAT number, but they can contact the administration directly or through any agent or proxy that has no liability and no impact. No bank guarantee can be required, no other type of security. And obviously the fees will be lower because you don't have to pay for that responsibility, that liability. So that's basically where the difference lies. Any your US entity can register legally in any member state in the EU. In most of them, they will need a fiscal representative. In some of them, I myself, our company, a tax advisor, we do help companies managing VAT number in other country than their own. I myself, there is some country where I cannot provide a fiscal representative because it's impossible because of the fees or the requirements that are so high. But legally, you can. So that's the only benefit of having a EU entity as the organizer of the events that take place in Europe, is that they will have a lot easier and a lot cheaper way to fulfill all the VAT obligation that any organizer will have when having this type of event. I think I'll leave it there and then maybe I'll answer your questions if there are any.
Okay. So one of the other questions that we've repeatedly had differing answers to is obviously we're going to Portugal this year. Portugal is a slightly more difficult country to work with than some of the others. In your personal opinion, where do you think would be the best places for us to host our events based around the ease of doing things? I mean, I've heard Greece is bad and I've heard Portugal is bad.
It's a very difficult question. Again, it will vary if we're talking about the US entity organizing or the Belgian entity organizing. If I may characterize, the more you go east, the more you go south, the more difficult it will be.
Right.
Basically, the old Europe is usually the easiest.
Yeah. I know the board wants to move the event around, but effectively, you know, we've had good experiences with Ireland. We've had good experiences in Italy to a certain degree. The problem with Italy was it was a very expensive location for us, and we didn't make much money. But at the end of the day, basically, in terms of taxes, it wasn't too bad. So the reality is that this is the first time that we've really come across all of these different rules, and I'm wondering if we keep. I'm pretty sure that at this point, I think the board, and correct me if I'm wrong, board, will keep the Belgian entity to make the European conferences work. So we'll try to keep it with the idea of the, obviously the fiscal representative would probably block us from, we would need a bank guarantee, we would need a fiscal representative. It sounds like a lot of additional work for the US entity to run events by itself, whereas it sounds like there's less work if we actually use the European entity. So while we still have a European entity, let's consider the VAT consideration. So if we held an event in Belgium rather than, because it's a Belgian entity, like in Brussels, Leuven, somewhere like that, is there any advantage to having an event just in Belgium rather than move it around?
Well, obviously, I've seen from the public data that your Belgian entity already has a Belgian VAT number.
Correct.
So basically, someone is already filing VAT returns. So basically, there is no extra work. Everything is already taken care of. So if you organize your event, if the Belgian entity organizes an event in Brussels, in Belgium, anywhere, they will charge 21% Belgian VAT on the registration fees. They will put that in the VAT return that supposedly they already file, and that's it. So no extra work at all.
Right. Okay.
So generally,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry, I can't find where to raise the button. I think when I'm sharing a screen, I can't raise my hand. Just to be clear, wherever the EU entity is created, doing the event in that country would always be the simplest.
Yeah, but you're not going to create an entity for each country. That makes
Right.
no sense.
Right, but if there's one place.
Yeah, so say for example, yeah, if we chose to always be in Ireland, or we always chose to be in Amsterdam, it would make sense for us to move the entity, is what you're saying.
So if the question is, if we decide to organize all our events in Europe every time in the same country, then yes, it's easy. You have an entity in that country and that's settled. That being said, the fact that you are having an entity in Belgium is already, as I mentioned before, a lot easier than if the US entity would have to comply. But now that Belgian entity, tomorrow you want to organize an event in Amsterdam, they can obtain a Dutch VAT number, file the VAT return quarterly in Amsterdam for 1-2 quarters, and then cancel that VAT number. It's totally manageable. It can be done directly. We can assist. Anyone basically could assist. And you can have events in different countries. From a VAT perspective only, there are obviously countries that I would recommend and other where I would like give you a couple of warnings. For example, you mentioned Italy. Italy is a country where a refund of a VAT credit takes the longer. It could take a couple of years to get your money back. So there are a couple of examples like that I can give you. But let's imagine, I don't know, you want to organize 3 or 4 events in Europe a year, always in the same countries. You could go to Germany, to France, to Belgium, to the Netherlands. You could go to Spain or Italy, no problem. I wouldn't create an entity in each of those countries. I would use the Belgian entity that is already created. When the event is in Brussels, it's the simplest for sure. But when you go to Germany, we get a German VAT number. We file the returns. The event is over. We've reported everything. We cancel the number. We get to the next one. Except if you're telling me that you will come back to Germany the next year, then we keep the number active. We file nil return till you open the registration for the next event, and that's it. So everything can be manageable. Again, it could be manageable with the US entity as well, but it's going to be much more complicated. But I wouldn't put it so far as to create an entity everywhere, because there, the problem is that you're not limited to VAT anymore. If you create an entity, you have corporate tax issues, you have payroll issues. You're gonna open. You have pure accountancy and accounting regulations that you have to abide with. I don't know. There is no point in creating that everywhere.
Yeah, no, realistically, we've been looking at closing the European entity for some time, because we've spent about about $250,000 on it over its existence. And I'm not sure that we've actually ever seen VAT returns in that same amount, but it costs money to be in business. And, it sounds like the US running the conference is going to be much more complicated. And for that, there's overhead, and we have to live with that. Jason.
I'll let him respond to that first, and then I'll ask my question.
I'm
I
not
saw the
sure
look
that,
of puzzlement on Bernard's face. Bernard looked very puzzled at what you just said, Andrew, and I'm curious what the puzzlement is.
But you were talking about $500,000 in,
no,
in the
about
Belgian.
about a quarter of a million over the 15 years that we've had it.
Well, can I ask you, aside for the idea of the event, what's in that European entity? What did they do up to now?
Nothing. We don't use it very often because it's difficult. ING closes our accounts almost all the time that we try to use it from America. If we're going to go and make this work, I'm going to have to invest in a VPN so that it looks like we're coming from Belgium, because they think even downloading a statement, like logging on and downloading a statement, is suspicious behavior. And so for months at a time, our ING bank accounts have been inaccessible to us, and it requires our European representative, who currently lives in Amsterdam, to go to an ING branch and reopen the account, and it's painful. What we'll do is, when we figure this out, we have to figure out how to use the entity for our tax advantage. And you did mention that there are local rules for deductibility for VAT. So our hotel bill, our accommodation, that sort of thing. I don't know what those rules are, but if we put them in, and we claim those expenses, if we don't know the rules, is it best that we actually use a VAT specialist to complete our VAT returns? Because I can do a nil return easy. The other returns not so.
No. Okay, so two separate things. First of all, the Belgian entity. So you have to. I suppose it was created in Belgium because there is a very attractive corporate tax situation for non-profit organization, where from a corporate tax point of view, in theory, you pay no to little taxes in Belgium.
Yes.
Now, the banking issues that you're talking about depend on European rules. So you have that banking situation in every country into the EU. They want to guarantee your origin of funds and the money is clear. And to be honest with you, the issues that you're having, I have probably 50, 60 non-profit organizations based in Belgium that have had the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not specific to you and the fact that you're in the US.
Mm-hmm.
It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the change in the banking regulations in Europe in general. Not having said that, obviously, if there is an entity, there has to be a minimum of substance in that entity. And the minimum of substance is that the managing decisions have to be taken from there. Nowadays, well, we're in the middle of a board meeting. All the international nonprofit organizations have the board meeting online with
Mm-hmm.
people sitting all over the world. So the question of the sustenance of the entity, again, it's a question that every non-profit, international non-profit and organizing event has. But it has to be taken into consideration to have at least, because I see here that there are 3 people in that entity: Knobloch Martin,
Mm-hmm.
Mesdac Martin, and Winkels Adrian. So if there is a director there, he has to be in Belgium from time to time. That he has to be able to demonstrate that some managing decisions have been taken from Belgium.
Okay.
That's about the European entity. Now, VAT and organization of events, the rules of deduction will change from one country to another. All member states have a margin of maneuver, and there are different possibilities, and there are different models to be put in place. I don't know if you organize directly your event, if you work with professional Congress organizers, but the idea is always to try to optimize, because you register obviously to respect the EU regulation and the local regulation, but from an economic point of view, you want to be able to deduct all the VAT on the expenses. And the VAT on expenses that you will have with local VAT at the place where the event takes place is always catering, accommodation, conference hall rental, transport of persons like shuttles, if you organize them, and local purchase of goods. That's it. Those are the ones. Any other supply or service is not localized where the event takes place from a VAT perspective.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So in some country, there are restrictions. Usually the restrictions are around accommodation and catering. And in some country there are, in some country there aren't. In some country you might optimize by re-invoicing separately on your events invoice. Let me take an example. In the Netherlands, for example, if you want to be able to deduct a VAT on catering, it's simply having two lines on your invoice, meaning one line registration and one line gala dinner, for example, and then you are able to deduct all the VAT on your catering, which usually are important amounts. So for every country, there are rules, but there are optimizations. There are ways to work around it. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, there are countries that are more difficult with administration, that are more picky. You mentioned Greece. It's a great example. People like to organize event there because it's the summer, it's sunny, so people come to the events. But to try to make money out of it is more difficult. But again, if you have ideas of country, I can each time give you, well, the plus and the cons from a VAT perspective, because obviously there are other parameters that you have to take into considerations. And you have countries that have, like the Ministry of Tourism, have incentivized the conference hall to give great rates, or the accommodations have decent fares, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to speak about the other parameters from a VAT perspective. Old Europe, that's the easiest way to put it. It's going to be the simplest. Going to Eastern country, going down south, a bit more complicated. Avoid Portugal and Hungary, definitely. Well, Portugal, it's done, it's over, but Hungary as well, because they oblige you to issue certified invoice, which is very difficult for a non-resident company, and it could, well, either cost a lot of money or is a huge amount of work. So avoid those two countries.
Sure.
So my question, sorry, go ahead. I was going to say, I just want to make sure I understand something. I've been waiting for a while to make sure. So going back about 15 minutes, just to make sure I'm understanding, this is actually kind of for everybody's benefit. So just in terms of ease of the amount of work involved with registering to be able to do the VAT for a country, that there's three different approaches. Having a single local entity staying in that country is the easiest. Like if we have a Belgian entity, we stayed in Belgium, we did everything in Belgium, is the easiest. Slightly more work, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernard, slightly more work. We have the Belgian entity, and then we register VAT numbers in other countries, do things in other countries. But it's in general, with some exceptions to specific countries, in general, that's a little more work, but it's not a lot more work. And then you have up here being a US entity trying to do this is this massive jump in effort. Is that what I'm understanding? That you have those 3 levels of effort?
Well, yeah, again, I wouldn't advertise opening an entity wherever you want to.
Well, no, I'm talking about just staying in Belgium forever. Like only ever doing events in Belgium.
If
Like,
you want to stay in Belgium forever because you already have all those obligations in Belgium, but I'm talking VAT, I'm talking corporate tax, I'm talking bookkeeping and everything.
Yeah.
Well, then yes, you organize an event in Belgium every time, and you're set. Everything is declared through the already existing VAT number of your Belgian entity, and that's it.
But it's just slightly more work to register a VAT number in another country while remaining just a Belgian entity.
It is exactly what you're saying. You have to go register them in another country, obtain that number, file VAT numbers in that country as long as you have your event and as long as you have to report sales of registration or deduction of VAT. And when the event is over, you cancel that number.
Okay, so just in terms of administrative overhead, just a little extra work, not a ton of extra work, versus running it out of the US, which is
registering in Portugal is something that we should have done last year.
Yeah.
Asterisk,
some countries are harder than others. I'm just trying to summarize it.
Yeah.
And then obviously the US entity can do exactly the same, but with more obstacles on the way in various countries, and the size of the obstacle depends on the country.
I wanted to hear from the rest of the board. Dawn, I do see you've got your hand up, but the board, you actually asked for Bernard to come. So have there been any questions that you haven't had answered yet?
No, I've thought this has been very useful, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Thank you, Bernard.
Yeah,
and Steve, weren't you about to ask something before? Before Jason, you were about to ask something, Steve?
No. I was just saying I don't have any questions, and I was thanking Bernard for being so thorough.
I see Dawn's hand up though.
Yep.
Just one thing, if I'm correct. So Andrew, so say like how we would do in San Francisco, DC, we would keep that VT number open if we're going to alternate the same countries every other year.
Yeah. So if we
like
decide,
how we haven't closed Ireland yet because we're not sure what we're doing.
That's right. So
Okay.
Ireland is a nice, easy country to work with. I don't mind them at all. It's just realistically, there's other aspects of choosing a location.
Right.
And I just wanted to get down to the nuts and bolts of whether or not it makes sense to just have it in one location, such as Belgium, or whether or not we can move it around. It sounds like old Europe is the easiest place to consider.
Okay. Yeah. So we would keep those other countries open if, say, Lauren, Kelly, or the board, whoever decides we're going to go back there in 2 years. We wouldn't necessarily run and shut everything down because we would have to go back and redo the work again.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So,
I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I have a few questions here, and I'm probably missing a few points, which is why I'm not getting it. First of all, we're talking about EU member states only, excluding, for example, the UK, correct? Just clarification.
Yes. The UK would have to register for UK VAT. We would have to do that as a US entity. We would not be able to do it as a EU entity.
Unless we create a UK entity.
You could do both. Both are possible. The UK will not require a fiscal representative from the US, but you could still, if you decide to go with the Belgian entity, the Belgian entity can register in the UK the same way.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. We are holding an event in London later this year. And I still think we haven't sorted out the VAT for that yet. Lauren, is that the, the project summit? have we registered for UK VAT yet?
No, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, I think honestly, considering the problems that we've had with Portugal, we should probably get on that earlier.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bernard, a while ago, almost near the beginning, you mentioned that we would need to collect VAT even if we were not registered. Was that my understanding correctly? Like if we were not an EU entity or just the US organization, would still need to collect VAT for registrations and things like that? Obviously, we're paying VAT on all the services, but for people registered, we would also need to collect VAT, even though we're not registered as a VAT entity. Is that right?
He appears frozen.
I was thinking that.
But although I'm not Bernard, that is what I heard. What you said, that's what I caught too. So
That's what I heard too, but it just doesn't seem to correlate.
He's dropped off, so I'll readmit him if he comes back. But it is my understanding that we need to collect VAT now and submit it once we've got our sorry, Bernard, the question was we're in the process of registering for Portugal VAT, but we haven't got it yet. Are we required to collect VAT now and submit it once we're registered?
Sorry, you're on mute. Bernard, you're on mute.
Sorry, sorry about that. Are you saying that you're in the process in registering in Portugal?
We are. So we actually have Taxback International, who we've been dealing with for a few years now with our Ireland VAT and other places.
Okay.
They are helping us apply for our Portugal VAT, but it sounds, and Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, the list of things that the Portuguese folks are demanding is quite high, but what we're doing at the moment is also we're selling tickets to the event because it's next month, but we don't have a VAT registration complete yet. It takes time to get the VAT registration. So we've been collecting VAT. I'm assuming that we'll have to submit the VAT once this is all done, like once we've got our registration.
So the issue, we touch a bit base with Portugal. The issue there is that, first of all, Taxback International has to be named fiscal representative because you cannot register yourself. That's the first thing. There is a huge liability in Portugal in regards to that. I don't know exactly what Taxback has told you, but obviously because you are having an event and you're charging 23% Portuguese VAT, you're supposed to pay it back to the Portuguese treasury.
Mm-hmm.
But there are two issues. One, you're late because in theory, the VAT is due at the moment that you receive the money.
Yeah.
Second thing, as I mentioned earlier, in Portugal, you have a mandatory certified invoicing requirement, meaning you cannot use your own software to issue invoice to your participants. It has to be a Portuguese software that is linked to the Portuguese administration. It's connected almost in real time, and it's a mess. So I do not know what you agreed on with Taxback International, but they probably told you that you have to issue proper Portuguese certified invoice, and you have to report. The ledgers are sent each month to the authorities. So that's what needs to be done. The only thing by being late is that you might be subject to late payment interest and fine. But it's important to act quickly on the registration from the administration perspective, because obviously, if at one point they realize that you are collecting what you're calling a VAT, but in the meantime you haven't acted towards them to register, they will consider it as fraud. Because they didn't see that you're trying to register, but they saw on the other hand that you're collecting what you call VAT. So it's very important that the first actions towards the Portuguese authorities are made quickly.
Yeah, we've been going at it for a while now. It just seems like the list of documents and everything that they need from us is quite extensive.
It is complicated when you need fiscal representation. That I totally understand. Yeah. I myself have trouble finding partners that are willing to be fiscal representative in Portugal.
Yeah. And one of the things that was holding us up was getting a apostilled certificate of good standing, and we now have that. It's coming, it's in the mail, but the reality is that it's taken a long time to get everything that they demand to register for VAT. It seems like they're making it very hard for us to register for VAT.
There shouldn't be any apostille document. They should be a notarized power of attorney. That definitely. An apostille is not needed in Portugal.
Right.
But there are countries where you might, for example, in Spain, a registration requires notarized and apostille documents. In Eastern countries, some Eastern countries as well. So again, we're getting back on more countries being more complicated than others.
Okay, so Lauren, after this, I just want to find out where we're up to. It might make sense for us to have a meeting with TaxBack and just make sure that we're on track. Because the reality is that some of the things that I've been seeking out that were required, it sounds like we need a different thing.
We had a call with them this morning, and according to them, we are on track. But we can connect offline a little bit.
Okay, good. As long as we're actually doing the right things and we've got the right documents, yeah, I'll contact you after this meeting.
Okay.
I want to say something snide about third world countries and invoicing requirements, but Israel just started something exactly like that. So familiar, but Bernard, the basic question right now, until we get the approved VAT entity and number and all that, is it still legal for us to continue collecting VAT on the registrations? Should we stop doing that, or like what should we do right now?
No, well, I mean, so the legal point was you had to have your VAT number before opening registration.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, that's all I can tell you. Now you've started collected. You can put on the receipts that maybe your participant downloads on the website when they register. You can put something like VAT number pending or something like that. But the urgent thing now is to have TaxBack International move along and get the VAT number as quick as you can. What you want to avoid is the Portuguese authorities finding out about your event from anyone else than yourself.
Yeah.
That's what you want to avoid.
But we can continue collecting for now. Inappropriately, but
the problem is already there, so
it's not getting worse.
No, it's the same now.
Okay.
Now you just have to move along and as fast as you can.
Yeah, I think this is one of the other reasons, Ivy, that when we actually come to select locations, we should make sure that we're registered for VAT well before we actually do anything and understand the requirements. So, you know, as I said, Ireland is easy. Belgium sounds easy. We
Take
are,
into,
yeah, go ahead, Bernard.
sorry, I would say take into consideration, if we're talking about the Belgian entity and you need to register anywhere else, 3 months before you want to open registration,
Mm-hmm.
you start thinking about the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because between 2 weeks and 3 months, that's the time that it will take you to obtain a VAT number in any country. And you need that VAT number, legally speaking, only when you receive the first euro or the first dollar for a registration fee.
And
That's
for
the
expenses,
only
it doesn't
moment
matter when.
you need it. Sorry?
But not for expenses. We want to balance that with the VAT on the expenses. That doesn't matter. Get expenses before the VAT. We could still.
You can pay a down payment 2 years in advance. You don't need to register 2 years in advance. No, the only obligation is because you're receiving money for a registration fee.
Excellent.
Okay.
Question about the invoicing. Since all the point of sale and the invoices currently goes through Eventbrite, if people are paying directly instead of invoice me directly, does that matter? Is that helpful, worse, going through Eventbrite? I don't know.
You're talking for Portugal or in general?
For Portugal right now.
For Portugal, whatever Eventbrite is issuing has no value at all.
Mm.
Important point. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
except if they managed very recently to connect to the Portuguese authority and to issue certified system, but I have a lot of other associations that work with them, and I can tell you that they haven't. So I'm currently myself issuing certified Portuguese invoicing for another association that works with Eventbrite.
Gotcha. Going back to what Andrew was saying about the location. If Bernard, if we did not currently have an EU entity and we wanted to open one, and we're saying, you know what, we're going to have a conference in a single place, hypothetically, your advice before was to open the entity in the same country where we're doing the event, right? That was my understanding, best case scenario. And if we don't, that's okay.
No, again, you do not open an entity just to organize an event. If there is an entity, it's easier to organize the event in the same country, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah. Not a single event. We're doing events at least one a year, probably more, at least one in the location. So we're going to open an EU entity anyway. So my question is purely from a VAT perspective, and we're coming to open it now and doing an event every year in the same country. Is there a preference to one country over any of the other countries versus, I understand there's some that are worse, but
if we're talking about opening an entity to organize an event, from a VAT perspective, there is no difference at all, except the VAT rate that is more interesting or not. But if you're talking about opening an entity, what you should take a look at is the corporate tax issue and the bookkeeping issue. Because in some country, you would be taxed in other, like again, Belgium, for non-profit organization, the corporate tax is minimal. I think that's why it was opened there in the beginning, because Ireland has also some facilities. But again, do not forget, you have to create some substance in that entity. It cannot be just an address. That doesn't work.
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons we have to hold a EU board meeting very shortly. We have to hold it before the end of June.
So Andrew, going back to the much earlier conversation about closing and moving to a different place, that definitely has to be a big consideration, together and aside with where we hold the event. And
so I mean, basically, you know, most of our large events that we look at as being aspirational for us, like the Black Hat Europe, you know, those sorts of locations, they don't move at all. They have one location. but they're a for-profit company, and so they only do things for profit. We have a mission to do as well. So it sounds like from a corporate, and we don't pay a lot of corporate tax. Most of those fees that I talked about, the $250,000, have been, in the early days, we used KPMG for our auditing and to do tax filing and things like that. And so it was very, very expensive compared to the amount of business going through the books. In the last few years, because we've had such simple affairs, because we've practically not been able to use the entity, our tax has been negligible. And it's really just simply down to the bookkeeping fees and our auditing fees. Now, we are due for an audit. It's been a few years since we've had an audit of the European entity. So, honestly, it does sound like we need to keep the entity. Belgium is a good location for low corporate taxes. We've been able to operate as we've been doing without too much difficulty. The biggest problem is we need to find more Belgian directors. We've got a couple of people who want to work on the board, the European board, who come from the UK. That's not going to work for the Belgian entity. The Belgian entity needs Belgian directors. It can have additional directors who live elsewhere, but the reality is that we need at least one active Belgian director, and I'd prefer to at least have two.
All right. I have one last small question, Bernard. You mentioned earlier the VAT needs to be paid only on localized services. That's what you said. And you mentioned some things are considered localized and some are not. Obviously, attending a conference is. What about training? Some of the training is delivered virtually. It's the value. It's not about being in the room. Some of it is in person. Does that count as localized service for VAT?
You're talking about you charging for training, or
Yep.
Okay. So any kind of educational services will follow the same rule as the registration fee of your event, meaning if you have an on-site training in the Netherlands, it will be Dutch VAT, except that there is an exemption that can apply to educational services. Unfortunately, the rules, the conditions of application of that exemption depend from one country to another. And that means that if it's not organized where you're actually established, in some country you might apply for the exemption. In most of them, you will have to charge VAT.
Okay.
Even if it's virtual?
No, if it's virtual, there is it's a tax operation, but the localization is different. Meaning it's not due because it's virtual. It's not in one place. The rules are different, and they're actually changing on January 1st, 2025. And it's a whole other system that you have to apply for. But basically, you have to pay VAT wherever your participant is, if it's in Europe. But there is what's called a one-stop shop that, for example, can be filed in Belgium through your Belgian entity, where in Belgium you will pay for all the VAT dues on those virtual trainings for all the participants across the 27 member states. So no extra registration, nothing. Everything is done in Belgium through your accountant in Belgium.
Wow. Thank you for the headache.
It's my job.
Yes. Well noted. All right. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Bernard. That's it for me. Does anybody else from the board have any other last minute questions for Bernard?
I think I gave a headache to everyone, and everyone had enough for one day.
And I appreciate you coming after hours. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Worries.
And
Thank you very
really
much.
appreciate it.
And anyhow, Killian and Lauren have my contacts. If there are any follow-up questions, you let me know. Take care.
Thank you so
you.
much, Bernard. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, well noted. Andrew and folks got a bunch of stuff to figure out there. And then we'll figure out the location later. Since we are already about an hour into the meeting, I would like to go quickly through the rest of our agenda. Right. And for that, we will go back to where we were at, which was the approval of the April board meeting minutes. Assume everybody has had a chance to read through this. Have you read through them to approve that? And do you approve them according to the names on my screen? Matt?
Yes.
Bill?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Ricardo?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
And me. That's a yes for me as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take the screen back unless you want to share the slides.
Sure,
Okay.
pass it over to you.
Okay, great. I'm assuming people can see
Yes.
the slides.
Yes.
Okay. I must admit, it's been a bit of a slow month for me because I had 2 weeks of annual leave from the last board meeting and then went to RSA and then I got COVID at RSA. So in terms of actual work done, it's the last week, but it's been a busy week. RSA was really quite good. We got about 680 leads. And so what we're going to do is actually spend some time thinking about the best way to approach them. There would have been a email that goes out to them automatically upon the lead scan, suggesting that they might want to come to our events. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, Lauren or Kelly, was there a discount code that allows us to determine oh, Leah's got a hard stop at noon, which is for her. Chris, are you able to give
Yeah,
the...
Chris is gonna stay on until 12:15. She has a hard stop at that time.
Oh, okay. What we might do is, can we do the financial report now? We'll come back to the executive director report. Okay.
I'll see you guys.
See ya. Chris, give me 1 sec while I make you a co-host.
Okay, I'll try to keep this brief for you guys. I think you've had all the financial accounting talk that you probably want for one day already. Thank you for including me in that, though. That was very interesting just to be a fly on the wall. So I was happy to listen to that. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Yep, you can do that now.
And I'll try to keep this relatively. Can you guys see my screen? Yes. Relatively quick for you. It's kind of the long way around town. A lot of information and data because of the timing of revenue. To get to the fact that we're pretty much on budget for the year. But so for the statement of financial positions, you can see we had very little change in cash flow for the month of April. However, we had a significant increase in accounts receivable. And that took our total assets up, increased by about $600,000 for the month of April. This aligns with the net gain for the month, but this, just like the last several months, this is largely due to revenue coming in sooner than anticipated rather than actual increases in budgeted revenue. We are picking up in one sector, which I'll show you when we get to the budget versus actuals. But basically sponsorship and mostly sponsorship, but also registration is happening for both events much sooner than we had anticipated. So we'll have some good takeaways for the timing of budget for next year. But net total liabilities, we were at $74,000 in the month of March, $75,000 in the month of April, very little change there. And we're seeing the total net assets again up by $600,000 for April over March.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
going back to the statement of activities, we'll go into this more in depth when we go to budget versus actuals, but you can see our net income for the month of April was $810,000. Expenses increased slightly in the month of April from $200,000 in March to $215,000. In April, we are expecting expenses to spike in the coming months as we get conference expenses in and deposits for the conference later in the year. And again, we're going to see our net income here of $595,000 for the month of April and net income for the year of $1.1 million. But there's a lot of analysis to kind of get right back where we started. But don't get too excited about that, because here we see the conference revenue, registrations and sponsorship, which we know are really not going to be over budget because that's a relatively fixed number for the year. But we are collecting it much sooner than anticipated and budgeted. So total conference income for the year, we're at $1.3 million. Year-to-date budget was $188,000. Where we total donations in general were running slightly under. Where we are seeing increased revenue is in total membership income. We are over budget, and I think this is a true, exceeding expectations for this time, not just a timing issue as it is with conference revenue. So total membership income, we are $177,000 over where we anticipated to be at this time during the year. Any questions about that?
So for the board, corporate supporters is included in that number, and Kelly is working very, very diligently on spending more time in her day going through and hitting the $425,000 budget that we've actually set for the year, and she's well on track to actually hitting that number, and indeed possibly exceeding it. Depends on what happens in the remaining 6 months, but very good.
Okay.
Follow-up question. I see 25,000 on lifetime membership.
Yes.
That's cool. We have a big jump in lifetime members, Andrew.
Yes, we've had about an additional 100 members so far this year.
That's amazing.
Many people are converting from 1 and 2 year to lifetime. I think people are realizing the value of staying in OWASP for once you get to around year 3 or 4, and you realize you're going to be paying dues, and once you get to 10 years of paying dues, you may have had a lifetime membership. We don't generally run any promotions for lifetime membership. It is a sustaining amount. So Chris, just before we go ahead, the $100,000 CD has been rolled. I approved the roll last week, so it's rolled over.
Very good. Okay, so yeah, you can see we're exceeding revenue year to date by $1.4 million over the budget so far. And then looking at expenses, I'm just going to dive down to the bottom line here real quick. We are currently $55,000 over budget in expenses. That's largely due to these project expenses. I did have a question that in that conversation came up for me. Your UK event or your London event coming up, Project Summit, is that here?
That is that.
Okay, I want to point out an error then. We're actually not, those expenses, that was a tab in the budget that we did for conference expenses. So we don't actually have zero budgeted for that. I need to correct that. Because Andrew and Kelly, if you remember, when we did the budget, we had a tab for Project Summit And we estimated $68,000 in expenses for that, and that was
Mhm.
rolled up into conference expenses in the budget.
Yeah.
So, side note, regardless, we're still running over in project expenses. We're slightly under in payroll for the year, or significantly under for payroll for the year.
Mhm.
And like I said, long story short is that I think my projections is that the increased membership revenue will more than offset the overages and expenses year to date. And we are probably going to, even though we're $1.1 million ahead right now, I expect that we will slightly exceed our goal of $251,000 net increase for the year. So like I said, kind of the long way around town with a lot of numbers to get pretty close to right back where we started. But the good news is that membership income is higher than anticipated. That's an actual increase in gain. And I actually think our expenses are a little bit better here. Like I said, it just kind of dawned on me, reading some of the notes and listening to that last conversation, that we do have some budget for this, and it's in the conference expenses budget line item. So I'll work with Andrew to see how we want to correct that and represent it next month.
Okay.
And just jumping over to the cash flow really quickly, I just wanted to bring to your attention, for the cash flow forecast, you can see we are very steadily anticipating having right around $2 million up to close to $2.2 million towards the end of the year. I did account for both the increased revenue that we've received. That revenue was really forecasted to be in July. So I didn't want to overstate the rest of the year's cash flow forecast. So taking into account the revenue that we've received earlier than anticipated and offsetting it with our accounts receivable, which is $500,000 for this month. This is reflective of all of that, and what we have is the most accurate cash flow forecast we have right now for the remainder of the year. I just wanted to assure you that it wasn't overstated due to the timing of revenue.
Yeah. So, board, essentially, I think the takeaway from this is that we're receiving a lot of early cash, but that's fixed. We would have received it by the end of the year. So don't go crazy spending all of this early money. That said, we do need to do something about the membership platform. We've got a bit of headroom this year to do it. I'd like to see it done this year. We haven't had it budgeted, neither we have budgeted for Slack, which is turning out to be about $40,000 a year. So the reality is that we do need to consolidate down our platforms so that we can actually grow and use the staff better. At the moment, the staff are spending an awful lot of time managing our current, we're working on it. Star is working on right-sizing our Slack spend, but it's not going to get that much cheaper. The reality is that we either need to change the way that we actually provide Slack, or alternatively, we need to find an alternative to Slack. I'm not keen on that because we have 30,000 people on there. And part of the value of a network is the number of people in that network. Okay. Are there any questions from the board about what you've seen from finance?
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your meeting.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay. Thank you. I'll go back to my director report and I'll keep it short and sweet. Okay, blended has been signed. Implementation is underway. Our expected first year cost is $6,300 and Bill has approved the gold membership. We have assigned, excuse me. We have signed agreements with Eclipse Foundation and Centrelink. Basically, those allow us to participate in other industry working groups and we will have to figure out some way of having partner organizations listed separately to our corporate ones, because they're under a different organizational. It's more of a co-marketing thing, but we're actually going to be working rather than just providing backwards and forwards cross promotion. Delaware franchise tax, which was bugging me before I went on leave, has now been dealt with. That was a very minor payment, and a certificate of good standing is now on its way to me. Fully apostilled, gold certificate, blah, blah, blah. So that will allow us to move forward with our Portuguese side of things. It also means that we're getting a lot of the stuff that we need to do for grants back on track. And Jason, I will be talking to you about getting grants back on track later today when we have our one-on-one. Sam and I met, and Sam did suggest that I become more publicly visible. And so one of the first things that I've done is I've agreed to do a keynote at FINRA. They're doing a hackathon. And so I'm going to get out there and be a bit more visible. It's the OWASP Top 10 2024 year as well. So we'll be doing some publicity around that. But if you've got any leads on things you'd like me to be publicly involved in, I'm very happy to take that on. It is part of my role is to get out there and be visible. And so, Sam, thank you for providing that feedback. So, Avi.
So I didn't know what FINRA was, so I just looked it up. For those not familiar, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, apparently. Private thing to self-regulate organizations. Andrew, I think if you can work in somehow, drop a line of join us as corporate supporters, because we want more financial organizations. That would be fantastic.
Absolutely. I've got a contact there. So I'll lean on him when I actually go out there.
I meant in your talk even.
Oh, fair enough.
Like maybe even a call to action or something, you know.
Okay, no worries. We've got corporate support and new benefits. We've got Checkmarks, Ubic, AppDome, Mob, and Root are all coming on board as member benefits at the gold level. So very successful month for Kelly in terms of, and also very much successful for our members because they get these benefits. So very, very happy with what's happening. So effectively, we'll be getting some stuff out to our members very, very shortly, promoting all of these new benefits. And Kelly, did you want to say anything? Just because it is significant, the sheer number of them.
Yeah, there's and unfortunately, you know, I'm waiting for others to send, but they didn't come in time. But yeah, there's these, what is there, 5 here? So, and you guys can read. The first 3 are actual quotes. The last 2 are just like a status update of where those 2 companies are for joining as a corporate supporter at the gold or platinum level because of the corporate member benefit to provide to our individual members.
Yeah. Okay. Just moving on. Abby, go for it.
Sorry, just a qualification. Mob is not joining as platinum, gold or platinum.
Mob sent in their member benefit last week. Andrew approved it. I believe that was last week. They asked for a quote at the gold level, not platinum, gold.
Right.
But I sent the quote the end of last week before we were on holiday.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're not going to go ahead and sign.
Oh, okay. Well,
they went ahead and also, like I said, submitted a member benefit, which Andrew did approve. Okay.
Okay, we'll follow that up.
So,
pursuant to the corporate member, I hope.
I have not heard, but I will, I can check, you know, I usually check in with them if I haven't received the signed quote within a week. So it'll be sometime this week that I will be checking in with them.
Yeah, but all this looks great, raising more. We do want to just pointing out sometime down the line, we're having a conversation about what those benefits should be, not the corporate packages, what kinds of benefits we want for members.
Yeah, that's where I pass on. In the past, like I said, I would send it to Harold and to Andrews. Now I think Avi, I think I put you on that actual email, but It definitely was approved
So, yeah.
by Andrew, because I can't tell you if it's a good benefit or not.
But this is fantastic, Kelly. This is great work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great work. Good stuff.
Okay, I just want to zip through operations, WASP awards. I have the list of nominees. They will go out very shortly. Dawn, I will approve the list that you sent me. It seems like a very comprehensive list of worthy individuals. So yeah.
Okay, I will send it to the board today, just so you have an FYI who they are. Please don't announce them because I have to reach out to all the individuals. And based when I get some information back from them, I will it'll probably open next week is the goal. Hopefully there'll be no delays on the individual parts, but the WASP awards will open next week. Thank you.
Individual memberships, talking about the lifetime, I'd have to go back and look at the actual numbers, but I'm pretty sure we were about 1,100 lifetime members at the beginning of the year. We're at 1,225 right now. So I just wanted to answer that question for you. We are approaching the very peak of our membership that we've ever had. There was this month where we had a lot of fraudulent members join from various countries because we offered G Suite, and people have been abusing that. Jason has been disabling accounts. We found one where people were sharing pirated software through the Gmail account. So
I have to add to that. I was going through, we found a second one doing that, but we have found 2 others that were sharing that were storing and sharing pornography, including suspected child abuse material that will be turned over to the authorities. Those are both complimentary members over through the Israeli force majeure, but they were Vietnamese names. So we do have significant abuses. In fact, almost all the abuses are either student accounts or complimentary memberships, and the Israeli force majeure seems to be the primary means of acquiring those accounts.
Yeah, we don't have any good way of preventing it, basically. So the reality is that we do currently stand at 1641 complimentary accounts. Before we went and did complimentary accounts for force majeure, we were at around 100 accounts. So obviously somewhere between 100 and 1641 is the right number, but yeah, we'll see. Lauren, just let me stop the cat from getting on top of my keyboard. Lauren, is there anything the board should know about the current states of events?
No, I don't believe that they do. Actually, yes. So we are going to have a AppSec Days. It'll be virtual. India later this month, and or not later this month, later this year. And then we're also in discussions for incorporating an OWASP AppSec Days Spain. That didn't make it on there yet because we have another call scheduled next week. But just a few things to keep on your radar. The AppSec Days Pacific Northwest, they only have about 117 registrations at this time. If you guys know of anybody, it'd be great to get the word out. The sponsorships and the attendance are a little bit lower than what they would expect right now. But as nothing else is really to call attention to at this time, everything with Lisbon's going just great.
Okay, good. Obviously, we've had the discussion about the tax, and that's obviously one of our biggest hurdles, and we're working on it. Okay. With that, are there any questions from the board in relation to the executive summary that you've seen, the finances or anything like that? Because I want to hand it back over to Avi. Okay, with that, thank you, Avi.
I think you're on mute, Avi.
Yeah, I was just saying, give me half a moment to reshare my screen. There we go. Thank you, Andrew, Kelly, and Lauren. We'll pick up where we left off and try to go through these mostly quickly where possible. The next item on our agenda is the European liaison discussion. You mentioned this previously, Andrew, but with Rob having left, is there more to discuss now?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, I think probably the best bet would be to finalize what the board actually wants to talk with Rob about. He was a little bit confused when the email went out saying, what is it you'd like to discuss? But I've signed the Senelec document, so I'm hopeful that he'll just run with it at the moment. And maybe it might be worthwhile getting him back in a couple of months to find out how it's been going. ECMA, Steve, any update there?
Yeah, so we are currently in the process of standardizing Cyclone DX. Part of that work is, so Cyclone 1.6 was released a couple of months ago. That is the version that we are reviewing within TC54, which is Technical Committee 54. We are hopeful that by I think there is a General Assembly in Geneva the end of June. We are hopeful that we will make all the requirements and deadlines for that to happen, at which point Cyclone DX would be a ECMA standard at that point, with ISO kind of also in our line of sight. Also within TC54, we have stood up 2 new task groups. Task Group 1 is the Transparency Exchange API. This is work that originally started within the Cyclone DX community, but it's really designed to provide that last mile of sharing and exchanging SBOMs and other kinds of supply chain artifacts. I'll be doing a presentation to OSSF on June 4th on that effort. Task Group 2 is standardizing package URL. So Perl is a spec to identify and optionally locate software packages. That will also be a ECMA standard here soon. We will be standing up additional task groups as we see fit. Anything that is supply chain security focused is kind of in our purview.
Very good. And
Steve,
we,
sorry,
go
Andrew,
ahead.
Steve, can I ask you can I ask you for a word on wider standardization efforts, where else this would make sense for OWASP to do, what other projects besides the ones you're directly involved in, and how to leverage that?
Yeah, I think there's a I think there's some really interesting opportunities. One, there's some other OWASP projects that I would like to bring into ECMA. For example, we're starting work on this standard called Common Lifecycle Enumeration, which is a concept of different types of life cycle events that happen in the course of, a software's existence. For example, is it end of marketing, end of support, end of, life? Has the supplier name or product name changed, right? These types of life cycle events. We're also going to be looking at another, bringing in another possible software identifier into ECMA. Outside of ECMA, however, I think there's some opportunity for OWASP to provide, use our newfound liaison agreement with Senelec to accomplish some other things. For example, one of the groups within ISO is cryptography. The unfortunate reality today is there isn't a standardized taxonomy of elliptic curve names, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of them. And unless you actually go out to every single research paper and identify what they are, it's mostly an academic exercise today. And in fact, there is a university in Europe that actually does have a collection of what those elliptic curve names are. However, making them a standard through ISO is something that the OWASP Foundation could theoretically do, and it would benefit the Cyclone DX project if we did it. So there's a lot of different ways that I think we could, besides the AI work that Rob is highly engaged with, I think there's some other things that we can think about as a board that are highly strategic that would fix known gaps where we see them, and at the same time bring other folks, other organizations into the OWASP fold, potentially increasing sponsorships at the same time.
Jason?
Just really briefly, while I was at PyCon, I met the director of business development at the Open Source Initiative, who is very interested in building alliances with with OWASP. One of the things he brought my attention to while on this whole conversation of standardization and us doing standardization efforts is the open source AI definition. I have the card for it. We have been invited not only to comment on it, but actually to review and consider endorsing the draft. So this would define open source in an AI space, which is a key part of regulation, which is one of the three pillars, as Scott Clinton will tell you, of the whole cybersecurity around AI and LLMs. So that may be another thing we can look at is formally getting involved with the open source AI definition from an AppSec perspective, and putting our name behind that as the OWASP Foundation. Worth mentioning, Linux Foundation is already signatory, so it's a space we definitely don't want to be left out of.
I think in addition to what Jason just mentioned with AI, we should also consider how we can contribute to the AI Alliance, which the Linux Foundation is also a member of. My employer, Microsoft, Hugging Face, etc., IBM, they are all members of the AI Alliance. We should probably investigate how that would benefit OWASP and how we can contribute to that project.
Okay, I'll look into that for you guys.
Steve, something to think about, I think a later discussion is how to formalize and standardize this type of activity in OWASP between other organizations and other projects that we want to push towards that type of formal standardization. Thought exercise to think about, maybe discussion further later on.
Yeah. Okay.
I would like to be part of that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I really support what Steve had to say. And I think that there's a lot of collaboration and just friendly alliances that could benefit everybody and act as a mechanism for supporting projects financially from the larger corporate world.
Andrew, a comment about Rob. He's going to be in Lisbon training, but can we invite him to the next public board meeting in Lisbon?
Okay, I'll definitely get that to him.
Discussion with him in person. I think it might be even better.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Unless there's anything else on this topic, I'd like to move on to the website proposal discussion. I think this might merit a longer discussion than right now, or where do we stand?
Yeah, I think honestly, not much has changed, and realistically, we've got a tight schedule, and we want to get to an executive session at the end. So I propose that this is tabled until June.
I think it might also depend on the AMS that we go with.
It does heavily. There are a number that is a factor, definitely.
I think we need to stick a pin in that till we have clarity on that as well, but having a design for what that would look like is relevant. So just to get a majority vote to table that discussion. Names in front of me. Bill, can we table this?
Yes.
Ricardo?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And a yes for me. More importantly, moving on to Blend Ed. We already have a contract signed, but more importantly, how does that program look right now, Jason?
Hi. So because of some just some packet loss and communication around this, there was some delay in getting Blended everything they needed to spin this up. So they were provided that information at the base. I think it was like last Thursday. I sent all that information over. So right now, pending, they're in the process of spinning this up. What I'm going to do with that at the moment, to revisit what I was talking to you about, Avi, is since we have the master service agreement on that, but we don't yet have all the strategic decisions in place regarding the actual learning platform externally facing, I'm going to take the opportunity to work with the project and chapter committees to spin up internal training for project leads, chapter leads using this platform. Also gives us a better idea of what the platform's capable of and keeps Blended happy, because we said that we were going to do that first. That's going to give enough time for me to work up a proper proposal for a later board session, perhaps in July, around how exactly that training program will work. I would like to have board permission to collaborate with, because they need something of a mandate, to collaborate with the education committee on designing that proposal for how how we would do, how basically we would vet and establish and publish and update courses. I would like to work with the education committee to design that proposal. But I would like the board to officially grant that the education committee can assist with building that proposal. I would continue to lead that, but I'd like their thoughts.
I am pretty sure that's already in the scope of their charter, and if it's not, well, darn well should be. In which case you wouldn't need board approval for that. Anybody have better insight than I?
Do you have a copy of that charter?
It's on the website. Just give me a tick.
Mm-hmm.
And while he's getting that up, I did, in order to satisfy what Blended needed, they needed a domain name to set this up on, other than just OWASP.org. And so I went ahead and got OWASPacademy.org and .com. That is not committing us to using the name OWASP Academy, but it seemed like the safest bet. It total of about $30 a year. So if we need to change that domain later, that's not a big deal. But OWASP Academy feels pretty safe and obvious. So as the domain it's going to live on for the time.
So while I don't love the way the charter is written right now, and I think we have issues with all of our charters, it's very explicitly to provide a support mechanism for OWASP education activities, etc. That clearly covers what we're talking about now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will collaborate.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been looking at the chart all this time. Okay, great.
So I will work with the education and training committee then, as well as on my own, since they only meet periodically. And I will come back. My intent will be to come back in July with a proper proposal around education.
Just to light some extra fire under you, is there any chance we could have that for the June in-person meeting, or is that too aggressive?
I would only say I wouldn't recommend it, because we already have other issues regarding AMS and membership and other stuff slated for June, and that will easily dominate the entire session.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to avoid dominating the entire session because we have a full day in June.
Yeah. Okay, I can try to get something together for June. It's not a bad idea, but I would rather aim for July so that it can get proper attention instead of getting half bandwidth, because we're all shot.
I don't think this one should be rushed. I don't think this should be rushed, and I'd rather prioritize AMS personally. I don't know.
Yeah, I would rather we prioritize AMS, because also what we decide to do around AMS may affect how we decide to do training anyway.
All right. Does anybody have any further comments or questions on the Blended discussion? With all that being said, move on to the next topic, a discussion on committees. Right. Just for background, at the last summit in JFK in March, we discussed the various committees that we need. We discussed how to do it. So I just wanted to kind of bring this back up, because I don't think we've had a huge amount of progress, except for one thing that is worth mentioning, and that is that the events committee, or rather the proposed events committee, has posted their draft charter. Bill and Kevin are leading that. I helped them work with the original draft, but then Bill and Kevin are leading that. I'm going to drop that here in the box. According to our policy, it's 30 days of public discussion, raising volunteers, which they apparently have enough of. And hopefully at the next board meeting, we'll be able to have a discussion and officially approve this.
Okay.
Has anybody else had any other input or progress
Yeah,
on?
So the education committee met this morning. Jason was there as well. There were votes for new officers for that committee. Hopefully the secretary will send that information shortly. So Adrian is going to be the chair, Daniel the vice, and Shruti is the secretary. There also was since you have recordings of meetings on there, and we met through Google, we need to get them set up through a Zoom, or enable the recording ability in the Google meetings so that those meetings can be recorded. Obviously, we need to review the charter. That's why I asked about that earlier. So I'll make sure that that gets done as well. And I'm not sure what the last point is concerning about the committee meeting policy, but we're establishing they are establishing regular cadence for meetings going forward. So I'm looking forward to seeing those invites in due time.
So one of the biggest problems with the committee meeting policy is just who can vote and what votes are needed. I think that needs to be clarified in the committee policy, because it's not very clear at the moment. Theoretically, only the officers are supposed to vote because they are members and delegated board authority. But the reality is the vast majority of committees don't seem to take votes at all. And so to a certain degree, what is it that requires a vote? And if they do require a vote, how do they bring that vote to be on the agenda and discuss it? Because I mean, I think honestly, the anti-compete thing is still valid. And therefore, you know, we still want them to publish their agenda before they actually meet and make a vote on things. The reality is that we just don't have all of that fleshed out in the committee's policy, and most committees don't follow it anyway.
Andrew, I think part of the reason that most committees don't take votes is because they don't actually have a clearly defined charter that defines what the actions and targets they're supposed to be doing. And if they had those goals, then they might be more proactive in that, I think.
They also express that they have no idea what their authority is too.
That's part of the problem with the charters as well.
Yeah. So
I have a question. The events committee was published on OWASP.org as draft. I guess what is the process? Who makes the decision on putting things up on the website in draft form, I guess? Because if the events committee doesn't have a chair, vice chair, secretary yet, who made the call to make it draft? I'm asking not to critique the events. I'm asking for future ones, the one that I'm still putting together, which is the outreach and marketing one.
Okay, so I just did it. At the end of the day, there seemed to be a chicken and egg situation where there was no clear policy on where we're supposed to post it, but I felt the website and then at least announcing it to the leaders is really quite important. And so I just did it. I mean, at the end of the day, it was not going to happen. I could have left it as a Google Doc and just published a link to the Google Doc, but I think this is more transparent and we should always lean towards transparency as a core value. But the policy isn't clear, and without that chicken and egg situation being resolved, I think, Steve, you've got an absolutely valid point. How does it happen? It happened because I just made it happen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew.
Follow-up comment to that. If the events committee charter does go through and is approved, I think it should be used as a template for future charters, as opposed to random, well, cover these few things and it winds up being unclear what the remit is.
Ron?
Next events committee, it should say pending on our website because it is not a committee, just on that. Since it's in process, some kind of statement there. I do just ask the board, and it's only from my experience on the committees I've been on, is that if we can get a better definition when it's operations and is staff responsibility and staff or Andrew's decision, because there's been a big conflict with that on some things I have to do. And it really makes, I'm just going to say for me, my job harder, or things just take so much longer that shouldn't, because there's such gray areas about things that I think the process could be a lot quicker if we just kind of figure out who does what on operations what. Thank you.
Absolutely. And again, Dawn, the charter should be specifying what the committee is doing. But where the board is strategic and the staff is operational, the committees fit two places. They're both tactical to define how to do the things, and they're also kind of, well, grassroots type of community volunteers type of thing.
Yeah, so I guess the thing for me is I have Andrew telling me one thing my job is in now, the committee is telling me to do something else where, I want to make everyone happy, but somewhere it's not, falling easily. So I just need a little clarification of what goes where. Instead of having to drag Andrew into everything, it's a waste of his time too. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
Just quickly, Avi, while you were on the OWASP committee policy, one thing I spotted that there's still lots of references to the compliance committee. And I think we took it as an action to remove it. Andrew, I think this is for you. And for example, things like how committees are dissolved, there is a request to go to the compliance committee, which it no longer exists. Yeah, so if you search for the word compliance there, Avi, you will see all the references.
Okay, I'll produce a PR for the board to approve in June.
Okay, thank you.
One thing on the education committee point I have to bring up briefly. Conveniently and fantastically, Adrian of Secure Flag is on the education committee, which I largely think is a great thing. The only thing I want to make sure that, especially because the scope and the charter is a little unclear here, that could be a potential problem, is that Adrian was bringing up a desire to use his platform, and to his credit, he was trying to make the suggestion in a vendor neutral fashion, but to use his platform for training, and that he feels that would be better suited for training developers than than building a course. And I had to bring up that there's a broader area of education than just secure coding. So that to me, that highlights, although I don't think that is itself an issue, I think it does highlight the need for two things to be very clear for the committees. One being that to make sure that the committee does not, to Dawn's point, the committee does not feel that they have the ability to direct a staff member to do something carte blanche. Like they're working with us, not at us. Because I don't want to be directed by the committee to go use checkmarks or secure flag for something that needs to be on blended, for example, simply because that's, because of influence of someone on the committee. Although I still want that discussion to occur. But secondarily is I think we need to make sure conflict of interest is still considered especially since the education committee is going to get into an area that is going to affect revenue. We do need to make sure we have conflict of interest properly called out in committee meetings so that people understand that applies to them too. Just to prevent, I don't think there's a conflict of interest here with Adrian. He was very good about saying it's not just my platform, could be anybody, but it is a good reminder that we need to make sure that that's covered.
That should be part of the start of every meeting. Is people should be declaring their conflict, and that should be, I dare say, almost written in stone when they conduct those meetings. So, my opinion.
Yeah, much like here, it's recited at the beginning.
Just really quickly, Adrian is a European board member and he's also the chair of the Education Committee now. Does
He
the
is
board
not the chair of the Education Committee. Oh no, Adrian Winkle. Sorry, I got it confused. Not Adrian. Hold on. Andrea, excuse me, Andrea. Andrea Skedato, who is I'm sorry, wrong A name. I was referring to Andrea because he owns,
I was curious about that.
Andrea,
Secure Flag.
he was the
Yes.
individual.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That's what I was talking about. I apologize.
Adrian Wrinkles is the chair though.
Okay, so my question is, there is no real business in front of the EU board, but it sounds like there needs to be. Is there a problem with an EU board member, because Adrian is an EU board member at the moment, being a chair member of a committee?
And I believe, if I'm, Lauren or Lauren could correct me, I think, isn't Martin gonna be on the events committee or no?
We're trying to work with Martin, but Andrea also threw his hat in the ring to be on the events committee.
Okay, well, you can only be an officer on one committee. You can't be on multiple committees as an officer on that.
Well, Andrea is not
Right.
a committee member of the Education Committee.
Oh.
He's just a member.
Yeah, he's a
Okay.
committee member. He's not an officer. That is to say.
Yeah, so he's still Andrea can be an officer of the events committee. That is not a problem. My problem is Adrian Winkles, who's a EU board member, who's
That's a
also the
problem.
chair of the education committee. Does the board see that as an issue? Is it something that needs to be clarified? Is it something that we need to, because we're really running short on time now, is it something that we need to bring up at the board meeting in June?
I'm going to defer to the secretary in particular, but to the best of my knowledge, the EU entity is not defined as an OWASP committee. I don't think it's even actually defined in any formal way as part of OWASP.
No, effectively, he is a director with all of the legal ramifications of that. He can open bank accounts. He can terminate the company and things like that with a vote. So the reality is, I'd really like to hear Ricardo's opinion on whether or not he can be both a board member and a chair.
I'm thinking not.
Yeah, I'm thinking not too. Yeah.
Because we are looking for additional EU board members. We need at least 2 Belgian ones. I could always ask Adrian to step down. It's also unclear at the moment whether or not UK nationals can be a board member of an EU board. But I do appreciate
They can. I can tell you they can. They can be members. Yes, I know that from.
I had to step down from being a officer of the chapters committee when I got elected to the board because it is seen as a conflict of interest and according to the bylaws.
Yeah, that's
the EU is not. Ricardo, I'd like to take this and be cognizant of our time. And
Yeah.
we're at the end. I'd like to take this as a research item
Mhm.
and check that out and come back to us on that.
Sure.
Okay.
I would like to move on because we are at time and we do have one important thing. We do need to reschedule the June board meeting, right? We need, because we want to do this in line with the schedule of the event. It is an event in person. So we have a motion in front of us. Resolve the board's reschedule the June board public board meeting to June 26th, 2024 at 17:30, 5:30 p.m. Lisbon time. That is according to the event schedule. That is a Wednesday, right after the full day in-person closed meeting. Any comments on that? Pretty straightforward. I'm sponsoring this. Matt, you still seconding?
Yes.
Quick vote, according to names in front of me. Bill?
Yes.
Ricardo?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
Matt?
Yes.
Steve?
Steve's dialing in.
Oh, okay.
He's also on
Connection
mute. Let me just see if I can unmute him.
If not, we'll move on. And that is a yes from me as well. Even without Steve, we still pass the motion. It is now officially rescheduled. Andrew, please send out updated invites.
Yes.
And with that being said, we are scheduled to have an executive session. Board members, do we still have time to stick around for a quick chat on that, or do you all need to go?
I could stay around.
I've got a little
can
bit of
stay
time.
as
I
well.
can hang around.
All right, in which case, let's adjourn the official public meeting and stick around for the executive session. It is moved. Do we have a second to adjourn?
I'll second
Seconded.
it. Put Matt down.
I'm not going to take it personally.
No, I'm putting you down, buddy.
All right, Matt is seconding. It is moved and seconded to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you all very much for attending. Those of
Thank you.
Thanks all.
joining.
No worries.
Those
Thanks.
that can stick around, appreciate it. Andrew, please stay with us too. Do you, if you
Bye.
still.
Bye, guys.
Stop the
Aye.
recording, please.
Aye.
Yep.
In Lisbon.
Hi.
Yes, see you all next month.